Boldwood presents A Harvest Murder, written by Frances Evesham and read by Charlotte Strevens. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Harvest Festival. Imogen Bishop, bundled up in a bright red hat, scarf and gloves against the October breeze, hurried down Lower Hembrow's main road from the Streamside Hotel to join the trickle of villagers, heading for St. Michael's Parish Church. A sudden shaft of autumn sunlight bathed the church in a dramatic golden glow. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Adam Hennessy, owner of the Plough, the village's popular inn, positioned directly opposite the hotel, joined her, panting, his breath misting the air. Imogen shivered. "Let's get inside in the warm." "Not bringing Harley to the Harvest Festival?" Adam asked. "He'd love it." Harley, a cheerful mutt of unknown origin, lived happily with Imogen at the hotel she'd inherited from her late father. "That dog's in disgrace," she confessed. "He dug a hole in the gardens yesterday, just after Oswald spent the day planting crocuses. In any case, he's a real nuisance in church. I know the vicar says she's happy to have him there. Helen's a sucker for animal services with sheep and goats and so on, but even she shudders when he chases the church warden's cat, so Harley's staying at home today." They passed through the church porch into the nave. "Wow! The school children have been busy." Imogen took a moment to admire the display. The church was a mass of colour. Bright orange pumpkins jostled green and red apples polished to a shine, while sweet corn, tomatoes, sweet peppers and chilies overflowed into the pews, along with mountains of potatoes. The intoxicating smell of warm bread from freshly baked loaves made Imogen's stomach growl. Close by were baskets of creamy butter, yoghurt, tempting Somerset brie and cheddar cheeses, but the hero of the display, the centrepiece that topped the pile in gleaming splendour, was a magnificent golden wheat sheaf. Adam whistled under his breath. "Whew, they never made wheat sheaves like that one where I used to live. It was strictly tinned goods at harvest, in my run-down stamping ground in Birmingham." They slipped into a pew near the back of the church. "Just as well you moved to Lower Hembrow, then," Imogen said. "Heritage crafts are 10 a penny round here, and all the produce will be gifted this afternoon while it's fresh." "That's one magnificent marrow at the back," Adam chuckled. He pushed his horn-rimmed glasses up his nose. "Now, hand over that hymn book, will you? I haven't sung 'We Plough the Fields and Scatter' since I was a lad, and I forgot the words years ago. And here's Steph, just in time." His face lit up as Steph Aldred joined them. "Is Dan coming?" Steph asked. Imogen grimaced. "No idea. You know what he's like when he's painting. He forgets everything, especially the time." The four friends had met when Imogen's estranged husband died in suspicious circumstances at the hotel. Adam, recently arrived at the Plough after retirement from the police force, had set about proving Imogen's innocence of the crime. Both Steph and Dan Freeman, two of Imogen's old schoolmates, had become entangled in the investigation, and they discovered a knack for solving crimes together. Adam and Steph had grown increasingly close since then. Imogen knew Adam could hardly believe his luck. "I'm short, fat and bald," he'd said, only half joking. "I don't know what she sees in me, but I'm not complaining." Imogen watched as they sang. Steph in a clear soprano, Adam in a gruff, self-conscious baritone, and a pang of envy squeezed her heart. She'd so wanted Dan at her side today. She'd fallen for him long ago when they were both at school, and since the investigation cleared her name, they'd spent many contented hours visiting landmarks and walking the coast path, sharing jokes and laughing until their stomachs ached. Imogen had hoped. What? She could hardly put her longing into words. So many times she'd thought Dan was about to declare his feelings, but every time she'd been disappointed. She tried to make allowances. Both of them had endured failed marriages, were in their middle years, had worked hard, and were busy in their chosen fields. Photographs of Imogen's landscaped garden designs often made their way into country living and Somerset life, while Dan exhibited his artwork regularly in London galleries and in the nearby Somerset town of Camilton. Imogen realised that Dan's art always came first in his life. Deeply immersed in a painting, he would confuse appointments, often turning up at her door at the wrong time, and he'd go for days without eating properly, surviving on little more than coffee. Sometimes she compared their relationship with Adam and Steph's closeness and asked herself whether she was foolish to hope for more from it. As the organ music swelled to a climax, Imogen sang louder, trying to drown out her misgivings. Finally, the service came to an end, and the congregation spilled chattering across the road to the village hall for coffee and cake. "Can't stop," Imogen said. "I promised Emily I'd be back early. The hotel's full to bursting." Emily, her manager, was perfectly capable of running the streamside in her absence, but she didn't want to stick around with Adam and Steph today like a spare wheel. Back at the hotel, Imogen found the lounge lively with weekend guests, luxuriating on comfortable sofas in front of the roaring fire. As soon as Imogen appeared, they buttonholed her, eager for information on the best places to visit in Somerset in the autumn. After an hour spent comparing the charms of Glastonbury Tor, chilly at this time of year, with the stunning arches of Wells Cathedral and the smaller, more intimate atmosphere of Cleeve Abbey, Imogen heard a car squeal to a halt outside. The vicar, Helen Pickles, swept into the hotel foyer, booming a greeting to the startled receptionist and talking 19 to the dozen. "Hello, hello! Now, where's Imogen? She got away before I could grab her. It took me ages to load up the produce in my car, even with Adam and Steph on the case. It's like a greengrocer's now, and I can't stop. I'm off to the Ham Hill Care Home in a minute." Like a boat with the wind in her mainsail, she burst into the lounge and dropped anchor on the one unoccupied squashy sofa, her words tumbling over one another. "It's an emergency, Imogen. We need your help," she gasped, fighting for breath. "We have a catastrophe on our hands." "Another one?" Imogen said. One crisis seemed to follow another, ever since she'd taken on the hotel over a year ago. "What's wrong this time?" "I was just about to drive to the care home when I got a phone call from that waste of space Roger Masters at Hazelbury House about the Apple Day Festival. There's a week to go, the posters are up, everything's in trade, and now the wretch has pulled out of the whole affair, and we're up the creek without a venue. He's let us all down." She raised her eyes to heaven. "I don't know why I'm surprised. I never did trust the man, but I said to myself, we can't possibly cancel. Everyone's looking forward to it so much. The best carved pumpkins, the apple pie competition, the Wurzels tribute band. We can't disappoint people now. Nil desperandum, as they say. And I thought, we're better than the Streamside Hotel to help us out." Helen's face radiated delight. "Just look at the wonderful job you did with the spring fair." "Oh, no." Imogen raised a hand to fend off the very idea. "You must be joking. The hotel's only just recovered." Lower Hembrow's spring fair, held for the first time at the Streamside Hotel in May, had been a tremendous success, but it had taken its toll on the gardens. The ornamental grasses near the stream, trampled flat by donkeys and children, had taken all summer to grow back. On the other side of the room, Harley's head jerked up as Helen groaned. He trotted over to investigate as she begged, "You're my last hope, Imogen. I'm relying on you." She leaned down to the dog, muttering under her breath, "That good-for-nothing lowlife Roger Masters," as she tickled Harley's ears. Imogen winced. She'd designed the nearby Stately Homes garden before inheriting the Streamside Hotel from her father, and she loathed Roger Masters. She wouldn't mind if she never saw him again. Masters is a sexist thug, as I remember, she said. But I thought he was happy to host the Apple Day. Didn't he say it was good for business? Helen's laugh was bitter. He did, my dear. He promised to manage the whole thing. Now everything's ready to go. Craft marquees are rented, the food's organised, and the apple press from the cider mill's already in position, but Masters has cancelled the lot. One of the waiters placed a tray of cakes on a table beside her, and Helen's face lit up. My dear Imogen, you spoil me. White chocolate brownies, the absolute best. Just what one needs in an emergency. Munching happily and spraying crumbs liberally, she went on. As you know, I try not to gossip, but between ourselves, and don't pass this on, will you, between ourselves, Hazelbury House is heavily in debt and in the hands of the receiver. She flicked a crumb from her chin. I'm hoping the Streamside Hotel can save the day. Imogen wasn't sorry Roger Masters' business had failed. It felt like appropriate revenge. But it left her with a dilemma. Could the hotel possibly organise an Apple Day festival in less than a week? Helen was waiting patiently for her response, but she hesitated, problems chasing each other through her head. There was parking and insurance, and telling the police. If she had any sense, she'd refuse. She looked around for inspiration and caught sight of Emily in the foyer, discussing menus with the chef. Imogen beckoned her over. Helen's looking for a venue for the Apple Day, but we can't possibly help this time, can we? It's next Saturday. That's not nearly enough time. To her horror, Emily grinned. Well, it would be tricky, but if all the village helps to fetch and carry, I don't see why not. We know what's involved. It'll be just like the spring fair. Imogen bit her lip. She knew Emily loved a challenge, but still. Sensing victory, Helen said, It would be such a shame to let everyone down. The Apple Day is one of the biggest events of the year. Everyone has an apple tree or two on their property, and they all bring buckets of leftover fruit to press for juice to make cider. Imogen resigned herself to the inevitable. Chapter 2. The Plough Inn. Oswald Marchmont, Imogen's gardener, levered himself onto his stool in the Plough that evening with a satisfied sigh. Nights be drawing in, eh? He said. Autumn here already. My Frida's favourite time of the year. She made the wheat sheaf for the harvest festival, you know. The bar was filling up fast, for Sunday was often the busiest night of the week. Adam nudged Rex Croft, the Plough's barman, who was on a gap year after leaving university. Don't let the lads drink too much if they're driving. He nodded towards the beer taps, and it's time for a new barrel. Rex flipped over a pad of paper, flushing guiltily. He had a bet running with Wayne, the chef, on who'd drink the most, and thought Adam didn't know. Adam grinned. His money would be on Joe, a local farmer. Not putting the kids to bed tonight then, Joe? Oswald asked, as he did every Sunday. Not tonight. The wife's given me the night off, Joe mumbled, peering sadly into his empty glass. Her mother's in the house, the old battle-axe. He picked up the glass and waved it. Adam frowned. If ever a woman deserved an evening off, it was Jenny, Joe's harassed-looking wife. When she wasn't working on their mixed farm, feeding their herd of Jersey cattle or planting barley, she was shepherding one or more of their 6 children around the village. Joe went on. Oh, that mother of hers is an interfering old bat, always poking her nose into farm business, and that's the truth. He heaved a sigh that seemed to come from his boots. Better just give us a half, I suppose, he grumbled. Rex gave him a half-pint of scrumpy. That's not like you, Joe. On a diet? I can't roll home drunk while the mother-in-law's there, can I? She's got a tongue on her that could flay a tiger, that one. Joe shook his head gloomily. Mind you, Jenny's as bad. She was on at me all evening. She doesn't know I'm in here tonight, though. I went out after dinner saying I had to see after one of the cows and sneaked off. She'll be on the lookout for me soon, one eye on the clock, so I'd better be getting back. These," he added, showing no sign of leaving, "are my last few nights of freedom. The mother-in-law's going to be on my case all the time soon. Jenny's going back to work." "That right?" Oswald said. "Had enough of farm work, has she?" "She's a teacher. She taught a bit years ago, before we had all the kids. Farming a place like Highacres is a dead loss these days. No profit in it, not now the government's got it in their sights. No more subsidies for growing food, just for making nice green places for the townies to buy their second homes. The mother-in-law says she'll help out with the kids while Jenny works. It's just an excuse to stick her nose into my business, if you ask me." He took a long swig of cider. Adam lined up the glasses on the shelf. He'd heard the farm was struggling financially. Rex served a couple of young farmers, and Adam leaned on the bar close to Joe. "Good for Jenny," he said quietly. "You'll be glad of her mother's help with your youngest still at home. How old is she now?" "Just 2. 3 in a week or so." Joe's face lit up. "Right forward little thing is Harriet too, with her talking and all, and she knows what she wants. The mother-in-law told her off for standing on the table, and she stamped her foot so hard she nearly fell off onto the floor." He downed the last of his drink. Well, better be going." He dumped the glass on the bar and pushed his way out of the pub without another word. Oswald nodded sagely. "There's trouble up at that farm. You mark my words," he said. One of the young farmers, Terry Barrington, looked up from his usual table by the window. "I heard they're having to sell off some of the land. Joe's father-in-law gave him a fair few acres over towards the east of the county when he married Jenny, and Joe's hoping to sell some back. He thinks the mother-in-law's likely to pay a premium price now she's a widow. He's hoping she's an easy touch." He raised his glass. "Good on you, Joe, that's what I say." Terry's mate, Eddie, a wiry lad with a shock of black hair over his eyes, muttered, "More likely to screw Joe for every last penny, I reckon. No flies on Maggie Little, my dad says. He says there's more trouble up at Highacres than Joe lets on, and Maggie won't want to buy back land that won't make a profit." Every head turned his way. "Come on, Ed," Terry said. "Spill the beans, what trouble?" Eddie blinked. Either his hair was in his eyes, or he wasn't happy as the centre of attention. I don't want to say too much," he muttered. "You can't stop now," Terry pressed. "I reckon you're right about his mother-in-law, but Joe can stand up for himself. He's a cantankerous old geezer." Adam intervened. "Leave it alone, Terry. And if you're wanting a game of skittles, you'd better get a move on. We've got a match booked in an hour or so." The young farmers left the bar, balancing their drinks, pushing and shoving like sheep, crowding through a gateway with a sheepdog on their heels, through the door to the skittle alley. Rex, squeezing past Adam on his way to the cellar to replenish the beer, paused to murmur, "Something there for you to investigate, if you ask me, former Detective Chief Inspector Hennessy. I wouldn't be surprised if Joe's mother-in-law is never seen again." Chapter 3. Edwina. A few days later, a tentative knock sounded on the door of Adam's private rooms at the Plough. He opened the door with care, remembering Harley's arrival last year. The dog had leapt at him, bursting the door's safety lock from its moorings. Adam still had no idea where he'd come from, despite his extensive inquiries. He supposed the friendly brown mutt of no discernible breed had escaped from puppy farmers, although why anyone would want to breed such a genetic mishmash as Harley he couldn't imagine. Harley had settled in happily at the Plough. Adam had been less enthusiastic. He'd retired to the Plough in search of a quiet life in his own company. He hadn't reckoned on a needy canine companion, especially one with Harley's boundless energy. Once he'd chewed Adam's shoes, ruined a sofa and broken half a dozen cups. Adam had offered him to Imogen, pleading inexperience with dogs and a preference for cats. Imogen, stressed, despondent and terrified she was about to take the blame for her husband's murder, had needed help. Adam had gambled that Harley would be just what she needed, and he'd been proved right. Since then, the dog had lived in spoilt contentment at the Streamside Hotel across the road. Today's polite tap on the door definitely didn't belong to Harley. That dog had never been known to do anything gently. Perhaps it was Steph. She was due at the Plough for lunch, and Adam had glanced at his watch at least 4 times in the past hour as he waited. He'd never understood exactly what a woman like Steph saw in him. A short, slightly overweight retired police officer with thick glasses and almost no hair. She'd be here soon, and Adam's heart beat a little faster. But today's visitor turned out to be Edwina Topsham, the keeper of the village shop. Adam forgot his manners and gaped. She'd always disapproved of him somewhat as a recent incomer to the village. Edwina had a strict definition of an incomer. That included anyone who had not been born in Lower Hembrow, or who had lived there for fewer than 20 years. Adam feared he would only become a resident when he hit his 70s. "Mrs. Topsham," he beamed, throwing the door wide open with exaggerated courtesy. "How delightful to see you. Please, come in. Can I offer you a nice cup of tea, perhaps?" Panting with exertion, Mrs. Topsham patted at the assorted collection of pins and clasps she'd thrust in her hair at odd angles, in a doomed attempt to keep her iron-grey bun in place. She must have run all the way from her small, cluttered cottage at the other end of the village, which she shared with her husband and several, Adam never knew exactly how many, cats. The cats were the only topic of conversation Adam and she shared when he visited the shop. "Tea? I don't mind if I do," she said now, following Adam into his living room and plumping herself firmly into the sturdiest of his chairs. It creaked a warning, and Adam held his breath. If the chair collapsed, dumping its cargo on the floor, he'd be ostracised forever in the village. "Well, isn't this a cosy room?" Mrs. Topsham stretched her sensible brogues towards Adam's roaring fire and took a deep breath. "Apple wood," she declared. "Nothing like the smell of apple logs when the weather's turning sharp." Satisfied that the chair would hold firm, Adam went and brewed the tea, then handed a steaming mugful to his guest and watched her stir in 4 heaped teaspoons of sugar. As she selected one of his chef Wayne's cinnamon whirls from an assortment on a chintz-patterned plate, he asked, "And to what do I owe this visit, Mrs. Topsham? It's a pleasure, of course, but I don't believe you visit the Plough too often, do you?" She chuckled, wheezed, and struggled to catch her breath. "Never set foot in here since my father died," she said at last. "Couldn't get him out of the place when he was alive, you see, and he died early. It was the blood pressure, you know." She nodded wisely. "Terrible thing, blood pressure. And you may call me Edwina, since I've come to ask you a favour." Lost for words at the compliment, Adam offered her another cinnamon whirl. "We all know you're a detective," she announced. Adam inclined his head. He couldn't deny it. He'd investigated 2 murders since his arrival in Lower Hembrow, and, as a result, everyone in the village knew he'd once been a detective chief inspector in Birmingham. "I am indeed," he admitted carefully, "or rather I was." Once the village grapevine had hold of the news, they'd inundated him with requests to find lost dogs, investigate car thefts, and follow suspicious loiterers. One imperious lady had even telephoned with a demand to "pick up my Lily from school, will you? I'm stuck in a traffic jam." He'd courteously declined to take on the role of a kind of unofficial 999 service. But Edwina's favour sounded different. Judging by her furrowed brow, she was genuinely worried. "If you need the police, I'm happy to talk to them with you," he said kindly. Maybe she was reluctant to talk to the law. Many people were. Abruptly, she shook her head. "It's not really my business," she said. Her lips snapped shut. Adam nodded and waited. What on earth could she be about to tell him? "It's the Trevillions, you see," she said at last. "Jenny and Joe. You know Joe, of course. He's in here whenever the fancy takes him, drinking and leaving Jenny to cope up there on the farm all alone. And now this." "This?" Adam raised an eyebrow. "Has something happened?" She spread her hands wide. "Well, he's only gone and done a runner, hasn't he?" "Joe?" Adam stared. "You mean Joe's left home? Disappeared?" "But he was here on Sunday." Adam thought back over the chatter in the bar. Joe had seemed grumpier than usual. Jenny's mother was at Highacres helping out, he remembered. "Huh!" Edwina barked. Adam's tea slopped over the top of his mug. "Helping out, indeed." She jabbed the air with a finger in time with her words. "Interfering between man and wife. That's what I call it." Adam pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at the tea stain on the knee of his trousers as Edwina went on talking. "She's an interfering old woman, is Maggie Little. I don't know why she's taken to landing herself on Jenny and Joe, or what's been going on at Highacres, but she's been dropping in there most days. No wonder Joe left home that very night, and Jenny hasn't seen hide nor hair of him since. He never went home. Not that I blame him," she snorted. "Can't stand that kind of nosiness from his mother-in-law." She shook her head. "Mind you, I reckon Joe will soon regret running off. He'll be lost without Jenny. She wears the trousers in that family, running the farm and feeding all those children. He's got on top of her lately, I reckon. She's been looking tired." "Perhaps that's why her mother stepped in," Adam suggested. "And to help out when she goes back to work. It'll be a strain on Joe." "That's as maybe. But there's ways of managing a man without belittling him, you know." Personal experience, Adam guessed, glad he wasn't Mr. Topsham. "In any case," she persisted, "Joe will go to pieces on his own. I doubt he can even cook decent beans on toast. He's probably sleeping on the streets already." "Joe's a grown man and at liberty to leave home if he chooses," Adam pointed out. "There's no law against it." Edwina scrambled awkwardly to her feet, offended. "I'm not talking about the law." She flared, her hands on her hips. "I'm talking about being a good neighbour. Poor Jenny's up there, dealing with everything on the farm. She needs her husband about the place, no matter what a waste of space he might be. I'd thought you were the one to ask for help, but if you're not going to bother, I'll find someone who will." "Hold on a minute," Adam protested. "I haven't said I won't help, but I need to know the facts. Has Jenny talked to you about all this?" With a groan, Edwina let herself fall back into her chair. "Course she has. Worried sick she is, and wanting him back. I told her she should come to you, but you know what she's like. Doesn't want to trouble you. But we can't let that family come to grief without trying to help, can we?" Adam shot another surreptitious glance at his watch, wishing Steph would arrive and rescue him. "I thought," Edwina said with a triumphant grin, "your little band of sleuths might like to look into a mystery. 4 of you, weren't there, investigating that murder at the races? Young Steph will help. Nice little thing, isn't she?" Adam wasn't going to disagree about that. "And then there's Imogen at the hotel. Mind, she's busy with her own life. I've no idea what she sees in that good-for-nothing painter, but who am I to judge?" She nodded to herself. "So why don't you all get together and see if you can't find Joe before something bad happens to him, or his wife has a breakdown?" With that, Edwina bundled herself up once more in scarves and gloves against the autumn wind, and got up to leave before Adam could protest any more. She narrowly avoided a collision with Steph. "Just in time, my dear," she chuckled. "There's a job for you to do." "Perfect," said Steph, waving goodbye to Edwina, shrugging off her coat and rubbing her hands together to warm them. "Will this job help with my book, or is it something to do with Apple Day? No one in the village can talk about anything else. I hear the apple press has already been set up in the hotel gardens, And just now, a huge red tractor came charging up to the hotel, pulling a trailer, and nearly took the wing off my car. More marquees, I suppose. It's going to be quite an event. It was all over the local paper this week, Steph said. I've managed to wangle a commission for a feature once it's all over. Since I haven't written my book yet, I still need to put in the odd spot of journalism. I shall bribe Imogen to give me an interview when she slows down enough to talk. I'm hoping she'll spare an hour or two tomorrow. We have a mystery on our hands, according to Edwina, and she's insisting we investigate. Against my better judgment, though. Nonsense, Steph laughed. I've never known a place like Lower Hembrow for mysteries, and a spot of sleuthing never does any harm. Tell me everything. Chapter 4. Mystery. Spurred on by Steph, Adam had persuaded Imogen and Dan to spare an hour and meet for lunch the next day. It's such bliss to get away from the hotel madhouse, Imogen admitted, as Adam led them across to a quiet table in the bar. It's the hammering I can't stand, and Harley's wild excitement. I think he's hoping the donkeys will be there, like they were at the spring fair, but Oswald's put his foot down. He says the grass has only just recovered. Oh, it'll be a relief when Appleday's over. She shot a glance at Dan. You're all coming to help, aren't you? Wouldn't miss it for the world, Steph laughed. I love this time of year. First, there's the Appleday Festival. Not that I've ever been to one of those before, but it sounds like fun and I can't wait. And then there's Dan's exhibition in Camilton soon. I can't believe I know a real-life artist. Adam exchanged a glance with Steph. Not to mention Halloween and bonfire night, he said. Steph chuckled. Exactly. There's nothing better than drinking hot chocolate and toasting marshmallows around a bonfire in the dark, is there? Roman candles, sparklers, burnt fingers, Dan said. What a painting that will make. Better than the rather formal portraits of stately homes Henry's asked me to show at the gallery. The owners are willing to pay through the nose to see their ancestral homes glorified in oil paint. Adam chuckled. I doubt Roger Masters from Hazelbury House will be sending any commissions your way, not now his business has collapsed. Imogen interrupted. So, Adam, why don't you tell us all about this mystery of the missing farmer? Any clues? I hope we're not making a big mistake by poking our noses into Joe Trevillion's business, Adam said. But Edwina's adamant that Jenny and Joe need our help. Well, why shouldn't we try? Steph asked. We did an excellent job when we investigated the murder at the races. We stopped a second murder and uncovered a whole lot of criminal activity. And your friend DCI Andrews was thoroughly grateful to us. Besides, this time it's a missing person, not a murder. So there's nothing to worry about. I mean, we won't be stepping on police toes and there's no killer on the loose. So far as we know, Adam pointed out. Working with all of you makes me feel like a proper detective, Steph said. After all my years as a journalist trying to drag information out of reluctant politicians, it's such a pleasure to talk about clues and evidence with friends, round a table groaning with food. Which reminds me, what's on the menu today, Adam? Burgers, I'm afraid. Wayne's having a day off to visit a woman in Bristol, so there's not much choice. Rex can manage Wayne's sausages and burgers, but he's no chef. Talking of Rex, Steph put in, I thought your Emily was looking a bit peaky when I saw her the other day, Imogen. Is that romance over? I think it's fizzled out. She keeps busy in the hotel, but she's not her usual cheerful self. And yesterday... Imogen leaned forward to whisper, I saw she had a chipped fingernail. The others gasped in mock horror. Isn't that a sacking offence? Steph asked. Give the girl a break, Dan said. She's the hardest worker I've ever met. The others turned in surprise. What? He asked. I do sometimes notice what's going on, you know. Especially when it's a pretty girl, Imogen said. Adam glanced at the pair of them. Imogen rarely criticised Dan aloud, and almost never snapped at him. But today there was an edge to her voice. Rex arrived just then to take their order, and Adam listened to his friends arguing over their lunch, though what could there be to wrangle over in choosing a burger? Once the others had finally agreed on the sauces, salads and extra chips they required, they ordered. Rex disappeared back into the kitchen, and Adam filled them all in on the details of his conversation with Edwina. "I've agreed to visit Jenny to see what she knows about Joe's disappearance. Edwina says she's half out of her mind with worry, flipping between thinking she drove him away by saying she'll go back to work and worrying he's had some sort of a breakdown." "Or run off with Maria Rostropova," Steph chuckled. "He couldn't take his eyes off her at the spring fair." "Shh," Dan hissed. He was facing the door. "Keep your voice down." The other three turned and watched as Maria, the most glamorous woman in Lower Hembrow, as the Plough's regulars called her, swept inside. Imogen groaned. "She's always in here," she muttered. Steph grinned at Adam. "Did it ever occur to you that she comes to see you?" "She comes when she wants Adam to do something for her," Imogen whispered. "She's like a leech." Steph said, "But a fabulous-looking one." Adam couldn't disagree. Widowed while living in Romania, Maria had come to England in a state she described, in her attractive and carefully exaggerated accent, as penniless, darling, quite destitute. She'd latched onto Adam, persuading him to lend her money that she'd never returned, and involving him in any number of charitable schemes. A little straight-talking had put paid to her attempt to skim money from the charities, but neither Imogen nor Steph trusted her an inch. Maria perched a hip on the next table. "How lovely to see you all together," she cooed. "Such good friends. Are you solving more crimes?" "Why, have you committed one?" Imogen asked genially. Maria's blue eyes were sharp as diamonds. She raised an eyebrow. "Imogen, dear, what an original sweater. You have so many lovely warm things. I suppose a gardener like you needs them out in all weathers. But this wind is so aging, isn't it?" Without waiting for an answer, she wandered over to the bar. "Rex, dear, may I have my usual? Better make it a double, I think. It's chilly in here." Dan frowned. "She's in here a lot. Does she have a drink problem by any chance?" "Not sure," Adam said. "I've wondered. She doesn't drink more than 1 or 2 glasses of wine in here, but while she's at home, who knows?" Steph wagged a finger at him. "Now don't you dare go round there to find out. Not without me, anyway. I know that woman's your weak spot, and she'll eat you for breakfast." "Nonsense," Adam said, squeezing Steph's arm. "But I think she's lonely." "Maybe Joe ran off with her, and she's hiding him in her bedroom." They returned to discussing Joe's disappearance. Steph said, "Why don't you run out to Highacres to see the Trevillions, Imogen? You know Jenny better than the rest of us. She'll talk to you." "We've only chatted in the shop, where it's hard to have a decent conversation, what with her toddler demanding pizza and feeding biscuits to Harley. But I'll happily visit her at home and see if I can help. It sounds as though she doesn't know where Joe's gone, unless she didn't want to tell Edwina." She smiled at Adam. "More time away from the hotel's Apple Day chaos. Bliss. Will you come with me? It'll be like old times going out sleuthing together." He agreed, just as the door opened, and Terry and his friends exploded into the Plough in a torrent of arguing and shoving. "Oh, I wish I had their energy," Adam said. "A hard morning out in the fields and they're still bursting with life, and ready for one of Wayne's burgers." "Oh, to be young again," Imogen said. "And they must love the Plough to come over here at lunchtime. They don't have long breaks on the farms." Steph was laughing. "Would you really want to be young again, with all the anxiety over life and our futures we used to suffer? No thanks. I'm enjoying middle age." She turned to Dan, who was frowning. "How are the arrangements for your exhibition going? It's happening in a couple of weeks, isn't it?" Dan nodded. "That's right. The invitations will be going out soon." "Good job you have Henry to organise things at Camelton Gallery," Imogen said. "Well, we'll all be there to cheer you on," Steph promised. "And I hope Henry's charging those rich patrons of his through the nose for your pictures. Are they all finished?" "The bulk of them are at the gallery, ready to be hung. But a few are still drying at the studio. I'm trying to stop tweaking them. I'm scared of ruining them, but sometimes I just can't help myself. You know what it's like, Adam. You paint. You never know when a picture's truly finished. I wouldn't compare my amateur daubs with your work, Adam said, flattered despite himself. But I know what you mean. And exhibiting must be a strain. Steph picked up a knife and fork as the burgers arrived. So, a nice juicy mystery will be just the job to take your mind off your worries. Chapter 5. Jenny. Later that afternoon,